All right, guys, let's do this. Proteins and nucleic acids. Here we go. So proteins are, there's a bunch of different types of proteins. So they're a really diverse group of macromolecules. They're basically made up of amino acids. Proteins and nucleic acids are tied together in that DNA basically transcribes to RNA. RNA then goes to a ribosome. You don't have to memorize this part, but just so you know for context. RNA goes to a ribosome and they make the amino acids, essentially. They code for the amino acids. The amino acids link together. That's what makes the proteins. And then they fold. They fold up into each other, and those the folded up amino acids are what are the functional proteins. The proteins that are actually gonna create our tissues and our organ systems and things like that. So the key terms here are that you're getting a bunch of amino acids, and they're linked together by polypeptide chains. Probably the most important group of one of the more important groups of proteins are the enzymes, which speed up your chemical reactions, right? And then your structural proteins, which make up your hair. So you guys could say, just a tip, you could be like, man, when you want to give somebody like a compliment, you could be like, God, your structural protein is really looking great today. Okay, so types of proteins, as you can see, there's a bunch right here. The two that I'm going to want you guys to really focus on are the enzymes and the hormones. Okay, the hormones are your chemical messengers. Now, our hormones can also be, some of our hormones are going to be like the steroid type hormones, and those are lipids. But everything else, for the most part, the rest of our hormones are going to be proteins. So our testosterones, our estrogens are going to be lipids. Everything else is going to be proteins. FYI, that's also why smoking those marijuana cigarettes is problematic for fertility, because because marijuana will sit, like the active ingredients in marijuana, not just the THC. Anyway, the active ingredients are fat soluble, so they'll create deposits in the fatty parts of your body, and I don't mean like your hips. I mean like your ovaries and your man ovaries, your movaries, and what they do is they actually sit there and they can interfere with the function of our the creation of our sex hormones, estrogen or testosterone. I'm going to stop talking. So, about that. Enzymes, here we go. So enzymes, they just hasten chemical reactions, and then your hormones are also the chemical messengers, right? They're the ones that are going to say, like, for example, they're going to stimulate growth. Okay. So the proteins have different levels of structures. I am not going to have you be concerned with memorizing these levels of structures. What I do need you to know is that the structure determines essentially what the amino acid can do, what its job is. So moving on, I'm going to do some pictures. Here we go. So you've got your little typical, you've got your linkage. Hopefully we saw something like these in when you guys were doing your construction of the models. So you have a polypeptide chain. You've got one chain. This is formed in the ribosome in the cytoplasm of the cell. So when we do the cell, we'll come back to this. So you've got your little polypeptide chain made up of a bunch of amino acids. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, so here we go. So you have your chain, okay, and the chain then folds in a different way. It folds in a bunch of different ways. So depending on the sequence, that tells you what shape it's going to fold to. So if you look, it'll do the alpha. You can do the alpha helix, and then or the random coil or the beta sheet folds again, and then those two other chains will fold a third time. Okay, just know the different structures kind of form. Proteins are unique in that it's not just so much their chemical structure that outlines their function. It's actually how they fold and what their final structure is when they link with other groups of amino acids or with other proteins. Just know that. Okay. Okay, so there's a couple, I'm going to talk about two types of proteins, which are your lipoproteins and your glycoproteins. So they are, the lipoproteins I wanted to talk about because that's where a lot of our cholesterol, that the cholesterol comes from. So you've got your, obviously it's a combination of lipids and proteins. And then you also have what's called your HDLs and your LDLs, your high density and your low density lipoproteins. And that job is to transport cholesterol, right? Cholesterol, we know, is a fat. So if you have too much cholesterol, it's going to basically deposit in a way in your arteries, and that's where you run into trouble. That's where heart disease comes from. So the lipoproteins, if you are, if you're watching your diet, if you're getting enough exercise, if you're drinking enough water, then your lipoproteins are doing their job, no problem. But if you spend a couple months on the couch shoving your face with cheese fries, then your lipoproteins, there's just too much cholesterol for them to really manage. So that's where you see this buildup, and that's where you see the heart disease. Other thing is your glycoproteins. So again, carbohydrate, glycogen, and proteins. These are the ones that are going to be on the outside of the cell, and they're the receptors. So they're the kind of like the signalers. They're kind of like the antenna of the cell, and they kind of tell the cell, they signal to the cell like, hey, what's going on? Do we need to divide? Do we need to make more DNA? All of that good stuff. I'm not, for these two, I just want you to put them in your brain somewhere, because when we talk about the cell, these two things will come into play, or the glycoproteins will definitely come into play. Nucleic acids, things that make up you and me. All right, they are polymers comprised of nucleotides. Nucleotides are basically just a bunch of, they're a combination of that nucleic acid group. They're the DNA, which is a sugar, deoxyribose, so deoxy meaning missing an oxygen, deoxyribose meaning sugar, a phosphate group, and one of the 4 nitrogen-containing bases. The nitrogen-containing bases are the nucleotides, adenine, guanine, cytosine, thymine. Those are the nucleotides. So you link those up together with your, and then that's where you get your nucleic acids. And there we go. Isn't that fun? So that's what they look like. When you guys constructed these, the problem with constructing a DNA chain is that in the middle, you've got hydrogen bonds. So you can't actually link up hydrogen, but you can't show that in those plastic models. So we're going to talk more about nucleic acids. I just want you to know that they are considered a macromolecule. They make us different, but then the same. And they have their unique structure. Like you've got that phosphate background, you've got the sugar in the middle, and then you've got that nitrogen base or that nucleotide. And they link together in a way that, again, it's not so much their structure, whereas protein, it's like, well, the structure is important, is one of the most important things. With nucleic acids, it's the order in which the different nucleotides bond. That's your genetic code, and that's what makes everybody different, but also everybody the same. All right, so here's just a really quick review. I would like you to kind of just use this as a little fun guide. I feel like we've covered everything to death in a way, so I feel like you know all this stuff. I'm just putting this out there if you want to use it as your, when we do our like test review guide, or just, maybe you could cut it out and put a make a little laminated card for you and just like keep it in your wallet. If you're ever like, ugh, what was the lipid again? What's the lipid polymer? Okay, so, or not. All right, hopefully that made sense. What I want you guys to do is bring in some questions that you might have or things you need clarification on. Well, I think I'm being totally clear. That might not be the case, and I want to review this with you in class for a couple 2-3 minutes. All right, that's it. Go Cubs.